All right. Good evening, community, and welcome back to the Live Black Experience. We are excited to be joining you here right on the cusp of Black History Month and discussing a very important topic, bringing back Dr. Evans to circle back on some of the conversations that we had with him at the end of last year about health in the Black community, but specifically this time we are focusing on Black mental health and some of the stigmas that the Black community is faced with, some of the challenges that are unique to our community, and so forth. So let me give our good doctor a little bit of background for those who are joining us maybe for the first time or the first time in a while, or were not with us last time he was on. Dr. Ben is an Arizona native. He grew up here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and earned his undergraduate degree from Northern Arizona University. He went on to attend the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Tucson, where he earned his medical degree. He completed his internal medicine residency training in Phoenix in 2007 and went on to work as a hospitalist for several years before embarking on his solo outpatient medical career. He is now the owner of Scottsdale Internal Medicine and the Men's Vitality Center. Dr. Evans is an avid traveler who enjoys spending his free time exploring Mexico and Central and South America. He is an experienced and skilled bilingual board certified internist who takes pride in helping his patients live healthier, more functional, and more fulfilling lives. Welcome back, Dr. Ben.
Thank you, Kara. Great to be back.
Absolutely. So let's just dive in. I think we're just going to have more of a conversation tonight, but I'd love to just open up hearing some of your perspectives on mental health in the Black community.
Mhm.
Is that an area that you've worked in? And if so, just what have you kind of seen or observed over time?
I think as an internist, you're going to run into, mental health concerns, issues, making diagnosis, treating people with mental health disorders, uh, either mild or fairly severe, all along the course of your medical career. Usually, an internal medicine physician, a family practice physician, is going to be the first line in diagnosing, treating patients who present with those type of issues.
What have you seen that's been maybe unique or just different in challenges within the Black community when it comes to mental health? Because there are some unique experiences that kind of contribute to that history for our community, but I'm just curious what you've seen specifically.
Yeah, I think in mental health and just regular physical health, if you will, those kind of present the same issues. No, there's really no difference when it comes to the Black community, specifically being diagnosed appropriately and receiving the appropriate care. Generally speaking, historically, there's been a general distrust of the medical community from Black Americans, and that's not without merit. There's been many. The maluse of medicine, if you will, as far as experimentation, et cetera, in the name of the advancement of medicine, has been lots of offenses have been perpetrated against the Black community. Historically, this isn't this is fact. So that being said, I think a lot of Black folks historically have kind of gone on with have kind of had this sense of mistrust. It's passed from generation to generation.
Yeah. So let's start there. Let's talk about some of that history. I was looking up some information before we started this conversation and saw that there was a 2020 poll of Black Americans with experiences with the healthcare system. And according to that poll, I believe it was in October of 2020, it showed that 7 out of 10 Black Americans feel that they are treated unfairly within healthcare systems, and 55% say they distrust those systems. And the article that this information was coming from really pointed to some of that history and some of the historical events that have led to some of that mistrust. So let's talk or dive into some of that history a little bit. I mean, you have Tuskegee, you have Henrietta Lacks, those sorts of histories of the use of um, Black patients for medical experimentation or um, just general practice. And then if you look at some of the history of mental health in particular and what it meant to be considered insane in this country, and just the general uh, practice of diagnosing a Black American as being insane because of the dissatisfaction with racist systems or things like that. How has that contributed to where we are now in terms of health and mental health?
It's contributed to a huge degree as far as, I mean, again, you mentioned Tuskegee, and that was in 1932, I believe. There was a study done on, I think it was about 600 Black men being treated for syphilis and didn't receive the appropriate treatment. And therefore, many of those patients died of something they could have been treated for in the name of science, so to speak. So that's just one of many things that has led to this distrust. So that's one thing. We also think about the inordinate percentage of Black people that are, say, incarcerated versus that of the majority of the population. So I think there's about 10% of the population have 30%, 33% incarceration rate versus the greater population with 60% and only 30%. So some of that, as well as when you look at mental health, I think Black people can be oftentimes more afraid of going to a medical professional for diagnosis. Possibly a person of color is in some sort of altercation, acting erratically. And this person might require, treatment for a mental health disorder, but instead that behavior, instead of receiving appropriate treatment, is criminalized, and this person is incarcerated, never to get this help that they desperately need for a diagnosis that's not made or not treated appropriately. So this also leads to fear of Black people. Black people are afraid of not only the medical establishment, they can be afraid of the legal establishment because it doesn't feel like they're being treated fairly, or if they exhibit a certain behavior that's exhibited by another, maybe a member of the dominant society, it's not given the same sort of grace that someone else might receive. So that's one thing. Then we can talk about religion. I think also the Black community, maybe probably now along with the Hispanic community, is one of the most religious groups of people in the United States. I think a number of 87% of Black people believe in a higher entity, a God, if you will. I also, with that belief comes the belief that maybe if someone has a mental disorder, etc., by praying, this might be a solution as opposed to appropriate medical diagnosis and receiving appropriate medical treatment. So there's a whole litany of things that kind of combine to keep medical or mental disease, mental disorders undiagnosed and underdiagnosed and undertreated in the Black community.
Yeah, I just my dad and I are both actually reading a book that just came out. It's called Madness by Antonia Hilton. And in it, she is examining the history of, I'm staring at the cover of it right now. She's looking at the history of the Crownsville State Hospital. And it is fascinating. I mean, I'm only a couple chapters into it, but the back cover, I think, just tells the story of Crownsville initially, that it was a set of Black people who were sent out. They cleared the land, they dug out and cultivated this land, and then were responsible for essentially building up in almost what equated to like slave labor, the building of this hospital, for which they then became the first inpatients. And so it was, they were perfectly sane enough to build this facility, but then deemed insane as soon as it was built and put into it. But one of the interesting things that she covers in the introduction is just some of her own experience. And she shares the story of a family member who has been experiencing a mental health crisis. And the particular uh, way that their mental health kind of collapsed was manifesting itself was in these conspiracy theories and believing that there was a white nationalist group out to get them and those sorts of things. And what really kind of struck me in that narrative is how close to Black reality those sorts of things are. And I think she acknowledges that too, right? This was happening in like the 2020s era. And she was saying, you know, you look on the news and you see the rise in white nationalism, the rise in white supremacy, or these different hate groups, the killings of unarmed Black people on that are televised. And then you have this relative who you're trying to convince that it's not happening to them when that's the reality that they're seeing out in the world. So
Yeah.
I'm just
It's almost impossible when you, especially in that time period, someone. So now it might seem kind of far-fetched. I mean, but if you're a member of the community, it's not necessarily far-fetched because it really wasn't that long ago. And there's that trauma that exists that continues from generation to generation. So it's not something that's made up. It's something that was very factual, very real to a certain group of people. So with the culture, with the teaching, these things are handed down. And with that being said, a lot of times people who have probably familial disorders, maybe cultural disorders, maybe genetic disorders, are never seeking appropriate diagnoses or care for those because their relative who actually suffered the reality of that time told them not to. And again, it's just they told them the risks that were very real for them at that time. And so people just kind of just carry that on without actually, without actually just looking for other options.
Yeah. I'm curious what your thoughts are on. I'm going back to some of what you were talking about in terms of the criminalizing of Blackness in general, but also just that difference. And that's one of the things that comes up a lot in this conversation is the fact that if you have anybody else who's seeming like belligerent in public or having some sort of crisis, it's very easy to pinpoint that as maybe they're experiencing a mental health crisis. But when it comes to Black people who may be experiencing that, they are seen as just disruptive or violent or that sort of thing. So how does that play into the current criminal justice system, the mental health and just healthcare system in general, and the need for them to kind of better overlap with each other and recognize that misdiagnosis within the Black community is also crossing over into mischaracterization of behavior when it comes to criminality?
So I think at this point in time, in 2024, people are still denying that there's certain, things that aren't right with the legal system. Then it's wanton denial. So when you think about if someone's not naturally born with some sort of mental disorder, that oftentimes a traumatic event in a very early age, a traumatic age can cause such disorders. So if you think about if you're growing up in, say, a time of violence, community of violence, a community with lack of resources, etc., when you have a young, malleable brain, then it's very easy to see that those experiences at a very young age can kind of change your neurotransmitters, your synapses, and cause more of a likelihood, probability that you might suffer from certain mental disorders. So if we carry on until adult life, someone's not exactly coping with the day-to-day as someone who's had more of an organized, structured environment is able to do so. So that same person, and generally speaking, again, this is something that if it's very apparent to anyone who's objectively looking. And like you said, you can pull up any news channel, any social media feed, and you'll see stark differences in how people are treated with very similar behavior depending on the color of their skin. I was watching a video the other day of a lady in the airport. She was a white lady, and she was completely just having an obvious psychotic break, and then she was treated almost with kid gloves. So when you think about something like that, if it was say, it was especially if it was a black male who was having a psychotic break, again, it's going to be deemed as a criminal type of undisciplined, sort of violent type of wanton type of behavior. As opposed to another person like, oh, this person's having a psychotic break. Don't laugh at them. They need help. They don't need to be incarcerated. So this is quite obvious to anyone who's just being objective. Doesn't matter whether you're black or white. If you're being objective and you're just looking at your general sentiment, if you're just reading along the social media comments and how different they are depending on the subject at hand. So this again is when you look at something like that and we realize, wow, a lot of people who might be having a psychotic break, which is not of their own doing. I mean, there's certain things you can't control. So someone who's having a psychotic break. Now, again, obviously, you need to protect the community at large, the people in their surroundings. That's of utmost importance. But when it comes to the person himself, is that person not? If you're just criminalizing behavior, putting this person behind bars, putting these imposing these huge sentences and then not receiving the help. It's not a rehabilitative type thing. And again, it might not be something that they need in the first place. It might be, okay, this requires medication, this requires counseling, this requires psychotherapy. So the problem is, make a long story short, the problem is this criminalization of these type of behaviors, if it's not a wanted criminal behavior, if it's simple mental disorder, is hugely different between a group of people of color versus a dominant society, and something that should be addressed by policy changes, by discussion, by classes, by education, etc.
I love that. And one of the things that you were talking about, just in terms of those different interpretations of behavior, that's something that comes up so often as well as when you're talking about, like, historical policies like stop and frisk or racial profiling and things like that. The fact that those parallels are not being seen, the difference between the interpretations or the reading of Black behavior that may be symptomatic or showing the outward appearance of an internal struggle, being interpreted by whether it's law enforcement or the justice system in general, or just even another person walking down the street, as violence or as criminality, those sorts of things. It's such a huge parallel. And just as we've been talking, I've been thinking about I think it's James Baldwin who had the quote, to be Black in this country and even semi-conscious is to be in a perpetual state of rage. And just
you can be irritated about a lot of things, for sure.
What's that?
You can walk around irritated about a lot of things, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just how challenging it is to have that reality pressing in on you as a person of color.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that someone should walk around irritated, but being a person of color, it's very easy to do so. I think it's a challenge. It's a worthwhile challenge to overcome that, for sure, for certain. Right. And something you said, as far as you said, exactly. So violence and criminality they're not synonymous. I mean, ultimately, violence can be a criminal, for sure. But when you think about the etiology of that violence, so that's not, so it's just because someone's having a mental disorder, it does not give them the right to impose violence on another innocent person. I don't think anybody with common sense can see that. So, but it's different if that violence, I mean, at the end result is the same, but we're talking about what causes that in the first place. How do we short circuit that? And so it's not like someone's actually going out and their goal is violence, their goal is criminality. Someone who's suffering from a disorder who ends up perpetrating a violent, criminal act. So how do we short circuit that? And I think we short circuit that by making people more aware, giving access to mental health resources, treatment, diagnoses, in the hopes that we'll be able to prevent some of these violent going to criminal activities by cutting it off at the source, by treating people who need help. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and let's talk about some of the systems that exist now, because that I think that is one of the challenges is um, you hear a lot about culturally responsive or cultural responsiveness in medical care or behavioral health treatments and those sorts of things. And just the reality of the fact that, I mean, if I'm even thinking of my experience with seeing doctors or anything like that, you're probably the first Black doctor that I've seen in years outside of, watching medical things that are specifically catered to the Black community where they bring out another Black practitioner. And so just that challenge of not being able to find a practitioner or a doctor or a therapist that looks like you or who has those similar or shared experiences or cultural background. Is that something that you've seen shifting over time? Or are we starting to make some headway in that area, or is it still a challenge?
To be honest, I mean, from what I read, it's still a challenge. It's kind of it's you could, my perspective is different because I'm in the medical community, so I don't really go to doctors. If I'm going to a doctor, it's usually going to go. I'm going to probably go to someone I know or something like that. So I'm not a consumer, so to speak, a patient actually out there looking for a specific demographic, a specific person, etc. So, but that being said, I know for a fact because many people have come to me specifically because of my color. I'm a black man, and I can relate with a lot of their cultural issues, a lot of their fears, their anxieties, and stuff of that nature. So for what I hear, that's actually a thing. And then and again, when I remember when I was a medical student, there was, geez, so that was 20 years ago. Holy moly, time flies. So there was, how many of us? I think 3 or 4 of us in a class of 100. And so again, I haven't been in a medical school classroom since there, so I have no idea what the demographics of a medical school is. I'm hoping it's going to be more than 4%. I'm hoping it's like at least 10, 15%. But again, who knows? But with saying all that, I'm certain that there's still a dearth of physicians of color, specifically if we're talking about color, I mean black, African American black folks in the medical field. And I think that it's a welcoming sight to black folks when they actually go to a physician, when they actually say, oh, this guy he's board certified. This guy is a competent physician. Not only is a competent physician, he's someone that I can look at. I see myself. He knows my culture. He knows, he's probably raised the same as the same kind of ideas, maybe the same myths, maybe the same misconceptions. He can set me straight. I'm I think people are a lot more, they're a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're a lot more accepting of medical advice, medical diagnoses, medical recommendations when it's coming from someone they trust. That's without a doubt. And again, as a medical professional, that's half the battle: getting your patients to sign on, to actually to kind of say, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. I want to follow your advice. I want to follow your recommendations. I want to be preventative in my health and my wellness. I want to kind of break this family history of disease, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, because some of these things are things I could do something about. So I'm going to listen to this guy because he has my background. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. And so that helps a lot if you can get your patients to buy in.
Yeah. Let's go to the concept of stigma, because that's part of the description for tonight's segment, is just talking about the history of stigma within the Black community and when it comes to mental health. So it's kind of, I guess, socially accepted or accepted within the behavioral field that there do exist some of those stigmas even within the Black community itself that prevent people from seeking help or feeling as though there's something wrong with admitting that there's a problem. And I'm trying to think of, my immediate family is very different in that because my dad works in behavioral health, so we had those conversations. But just thinking beyond that and that immediate family perspective, I can remember hearing other people talk about, a relative who was just kind of referred to as, oh, they're funny, or they're just a little different, or like we don't talk about what's going on with them, and that sense of almost dismissiveness or embarrassment or whatever it is that really does kind of feed into those stigmas. So I guess the question there is what has or what do you think has kind of led to some of those cultural stigmas, or what makes it so difficult to acknowledge the reality of behavioral health or mental health challenges within the Black community? Is it because it was never okay for us not to be okay, or is it some of that legacy of strength, or where do you think that kind of comes from?
I think it's all of that. I think, the times have changed so drastically in the last sheesh, 30 years when it comes to, well, it's just the last 10 years when it comes to mental health. And I think there's certain cultures specifically where any sign of mental a disorder is deemed as a sign of weakness. It's kind of like there was no, when you think about, there was no, I mean, back in the day, people were expected to go to work. There was no, women, they weren't getting, they weren't getting labor. Anyway, we call it, what's it called after pregnancy? They weren't getting pregnancy leave. Men certainly weren't getting pregnancy leave and whatnot. You're expected to go to work. Doesn't matter if you were sad that day, if you're down the dumps, if, you felt blue. No, you were going to work. You were going to the mine. You were going to the office. You were doing, and again, you couldn't really talk about things like that because you'd be clowned thoroughly by everyone else. It was a sign of weakness. So that's one thing I think is it was expected that whoever was suffering, you were going to suffer in silence, essentially. And that's just this kind of culture. You would suffer in silence. So, and the stigmas, like, again, I think everybody, like you said, in our community, when you think about back in the day, I mean, I can literally, when I think about certain people I've known back in the day, to me now, years later, it's obvious that person suffered from depression. It's obvious this person has some sort of psychological disorder. It's obvious to me this person was maybe bipolar. It's obvious this person was maybe schizophrenic. But again, like you said, they were given labels. Oh, this person's goofy. This person, oh, he's crazy. This person, but it was always dismissive. Sometimes it was a mild, it was kind of joking, it was kind of cute, it wasn't harmful to anyone. And oftentimes it didn't really seem like it was that harmful to anyone back then, but it was like it's either dismissive, it was a joke, or it just wasn't talked about. So that just kind of carries on. So I think what's helped lately with the mental stigma, and some people have, you can take this with if it's good or bad, but if we're talking about mental health, I think it's mainly good, that more people in the main society or more people in the popular society are more open about their own struggles with mental illness, with depression, with anxiety, with, say, bipolar disorder, et cetera, et cetera. Not only that, they're more open with the success that they've had by talking, by going to counseling, by being treated with whatever the appropriate treatment is at that time. So that's helped a lot of people, especially in our community, because we look up to a lot of athletes, musicians, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in our community, and also in the popular community, I think it's helpful when somebody says, "Hey, when one of your heroes who makes every single day look super easy, that makes everything they do look at easy, everything's success." When you find out, holy crap, this person who's so successful, who I hold up here, actually has been suffering from the same thing that I have been doing. He's been dealing with this all this time, and he's able to achieve these heights, even though he suffered from that. There's nothing but positive from that, really, because he's going to tell the young kid, "Oh crap, I can talk about this. I can go talk to my school counselor. I can talk to my parents. I can talk to the homies, and ultimately, I can actually go to someone who's a professional, talk to them, and get treated, and maybe." Wherever was holding you back, was kind of keeping you from achieving the heights that you want to achieve. If you treat it, maybe that's the only thing you need to do. That's the key.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true because I think of, as you were talking about that, and the even like athletes that we admire, I think of, was it Simone Biles who pulled herself out of competition
Yeah,
because she
yeah.
was experiencing
And
a
she
mental
was,
health
and she
crisis?
was, and she was roundly denounced. I mean, she was roundly, just. clown or denounced by a bunch of people. But at the same time, I think that, but when you look at it, that's more, look at her. I mean, she's Simone Biles. Look at her. She's just doing whatever she's doing.
Yeah.
But again, that kind of proves a point. This is Simone Biles, the best it's ever been in her particular field. She even said, "Hey, man, I had to take a break. I had to take care of myself." And look at her now. She's back even better than ever. So I think that's an example of a lot of people. Wow, if something's holding me back, I can tell my patients all the time, "Hey, man, if you have, I don't care what the disorder is, if you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, you have this, you have that, why sit there and fret about it? Why sit there? I wish it wasn't me. I wish it wasn't this. Who cares? Treat it and then get on with your life." And it's the way, and this even applies even doubly for something if it's a mental disorder, a psychological disorder that is likely hold you back from all aspects of your life, personal, your professional, your spiritual life. So if it's something like that, again, there was this huge stigma, but at the same time, who cares? It is what it is. You got it. Treat it. It's not gonna make anything worse. It's likely gonna make things a whole bunch better. It might be the key to your success, allowing you to leave all that baggage, all this. I wonder why I can't do this. I wonder why I can't do that behind, and moving on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, I think it's really a telling representation of that sort of conflict between seeing someone as strong, like a Simone Biles, and then as soon as they admit that they are struggling with something, they are instantly deflated down to, oh, she's just complaining, or the weakness or the letdown of seeing someone be open with that struggle. And I think of that in parallel with the whether it's internal culturally or just the broader societal view of, the strong Black woman or the Black man as being this always put together, very strong figure, or the wisdom that's expected from whether you're a particularly educated Black person or just uh, that assumption of that strength. And so
Mm,
how do we kind of challenge those assumptions? You often hear in mental health, it's okay to not be okay,
mm,
until you're trying to disperse of those sorts of stereotypes or the
mm.
idea of that strength.
See, it's super hard because remember, I'm from the old school, so I'm like straddling these generations here. So again, and I'm gonna be honest, to me, I come from an era when there was no, "Oh, I don't feel good today. Oh, I need to rest my starters there. Hey, we're putting them on restricted playing time like they do with a lot of athletes nowadays." So again, even initially with Simone Biles, I'm ashamed to admit, I'm from the old school. My first thought is, man up, woman up, this and that, because my heroes, the guys I grew up, they weren't getting restricted playing time. They weren't doing this, they weren't doing that. No, they were showing up every single game. Again, when you look back at, there's there is likely, all throughout the history of mankind, there's been people with mental health disorders undiagnosed, but a lot of these things have been coming out more and more as years go. So with that being said, there's a lot of people who suffer through these issues generationally, and somehow they managed to have relatively successful lives or not. And somehow they managed to do this and that. So on one hand, there's like, so that's why, so someone from the old school like myself, sometimes you struggle with that. And again, I'm a educated person, so I can still be stuck myself sometimes in that old way of thinking, like, man up, everybody has problems, why is yours more important, blah blah, play the whole game, blah blah blah. So I can imagine if it's coming from me, a medical professional who is relatively well educated, and I struggle with those kind of same stigmas or stereotypes or old school way of thinking. For other folks who aren't supposed to be as objective as me, don't have the background, I would assume it's even 10 times harder. So yeah, so breaking these stigmas, breaking these stereotypes, and being more open to the idea that, hey man, people need help and there's not a darn thing wrong with it. It takes some work. Because I'm just speaking to myself. It takes some work sometimes when you're comparing what you think is what a man was compared to, oh man, these new guys are soft. So it's hard. So yeah, I struggle with that myself. So I'm assuming, but it's the right struggle, because I think we all should kind of be a lot more open, a lot more understanding, and realize that some things you just don't choose. Some things just find you. Just like whether it's cancer, whether it's this or this, that, some things just find you and you just have to be about the life's very short. So you need to find your best way to deal with it. And oftentimes it's getting the appropriate diagnosis and appropriate treatment. Try and make the best of this very short time that we have here on earth.
Well, let's shift then into some of those best practices. We spent kind of the first 30 minutes of this conversation talking about what those struggles are, but let's shift now into some of those self-care practices or the ways that we kind of overcome some of those struggles. So I think for me, one of the interesting things that I was kind of hearing in some of what you talked about was the difference with kind of the old school way of thinking and you just kind of powering through. But what strikes me in that is if we think just kind of logically about the number of even professional athletes or whether it's football players or basketball players or whatever sport, who probably are suffering with a mental health diagnosis, whether diagnosed or not, who used their sport as their kind of coping mechanism. That was where they were able to get away with some or from some of those internal struggles. Do you think that's part of where that ability to kind of power through or live through some of that struggle came from? Was that was it wasn't called self-care at that point, but it really was their form
Yeah.
of self-care?
Well, yeah. Well, look at like comics. I think it's a pretty known fact that a lot of comics have suffered from, sheesh, it's evident, have suffered from depression, psychological disorders, that they use comedy as a way of almost self-treatment in and of itself. So, yeah. So the same could be said for anyone who's good at any craft. How many, maybe this great musician, the reason why he's a great musician, because it was just sitting around noodling, playing guitar all night long by himself was something that soothed them, so to speak. So absolutely, I think a lot of people who are creatives, a lot of people who are super successful in what they've done, oftentimes that has been their way of coping with and dealing with their whatever is going on in their own head. And speaking of another thing that might prevent people from seeking help, it's kind of just flashed across my mind. I saw a funny meme the other day. I don't know why this came across. It was like a guy, evidently he was a pilot, and he was saying, so FAA, which the FAA, it's like the FFA is the, what's the FAA stand for? I can't remember. It's something, flight authority. And he says, and it's like a meme talking about, you can't even tell the FAA that you were even sad that your puppy died or anything like that, because they're like, oh my God, you're a pilot and you're sad. Oh my God, you need to, you're going to take you out of the plane because, so that's another thing when you think about it. Certain professions, you can't even kind of even mention that you're depressed. You can't mention that you're sad because there's a very real risk that they might take away your wings. You can't fly. Maybe if you're military, they won't let you do this but by even saying that you're a normal person, you have a lull in a day, you feel sad about something, might prompt a whole investigation. So that's another thing that might definitely keep people from going forward and saying that I have this going on, I have that going on, just speak up. So that was just an aside. So back to your original question was, again?
What's the original question? Yeah, just really focusing in on how athletes and different people how maybe that was their way of powering through and exercising
Absolutely. Yeah.
self-care. And,
Yeah, it's like someone
practice.
answered that. And I think that's a very real thing that a lot of people their outward success is almost due to the fact that they were compensating for something that was going on internally for a long period of time. And they just happen to find their medicine, their treatment, their therapy.
So let's talk about then other forms of self-care. Do you see there as being particular forms that are more practiced within the Black community or particular unique to? I think in my mind, things seem pretty universal. It might just be the way that it's practiced that's a little bit more unique, but I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
I think probably the most universal form of self-care is probably going to be community and talking. People just getting together, just airing their problems. I think that's probably universal in all communities. Gossip or talking or chopping it up or hanging out. Because it seems like a lot of times when people come together, most conversations always revolve around almost the same thing. I'm assuming this is all communities. So I think that's probably the number one way. Number two, I think is obvious, is going to be music. I think that anyone alive can think about how they were, whenever a certain song comes on, how they felt this. Oh, this song got me through that way. This song got me through that. So I think number two, university is going to be music without a doubt. So I think talking, friends, family, community, music, and then obviously and then actually maybe even more so than those is going to be religion. So I think that's always been one of the number one ways that people deal with whatever's ailing them, is that let go and let God, or bring your problems to God, or however it's said in whatever religion, whether it's Baptist religion, whether it's the sun god religion, it's all the same thing. There's someone that you're going to help alleviate whatever is troubling your mind. So that's how a lot of people have done self-care, so to speak. Other things that people, those are how people have done self-care. And there's other ways that I think people should do self-care. There's meditation, there's yoga, exercise is a wonderful thing for self-care. And those are generally for things that find something that you enjoy that's not something self-damaging or damaging to others. That's a non-toxic activity. Those are always great for self-care. But the ultimate thing I think people should be open to, is which why we're talking here today, is that there's something that's ailing you or troubling you deeply. It's almost kind of coming to it's kind of trying to decide whether it's something, how severe an issue is. Because I don't care how happy, how whatever you are, life happens. So again, so you need to have a realistic expectations of what this issue is. There's going to be ups and downs. So it depends on how low those downs are or how high those highs are. And if there's any kind of thought disorders that's going on through this whole time, those are times when something, whether you identify it, whether a family member identifies, it's when you should seek a professional for a diagnosis, because this might be something that requires more than simple religion, talking. And talking is always going to be part of therapy, is always going to be a part of most of these type of programs. But sometimes you actually need a medication that's going to actually exert its effect on your brain, on your synapses, on your neurotransmitters, to actually affect those chemical changes that the body requires in order to change the way you're thinking.
Yeah, as you were talking and thinking about, the importance of really starting to engage in some of that thought of what's going to make you feel better in a healthy way. I again am going back to the intro to the book I'm reading, and what's really interesting in the first story that the author tells is that her and the relative that she's speaking about, who is currently undergoing a mental health crisis, meet in a park. And it was a place that always felt very inviting. It's where they did family reunions or family gatherings, or just went out to see other people having fun. And it was shifting for her in that moment to this place of, it was kind of a safe space, because she had been cautioned not to go to this person's home, because it might not be safe. But also just still that communal setting, or the experience of being out in nature as that place of safety and being able to come together and have that conversation. Even though it was uncomfortable, it was still that park setting. So that brings me to, for you, just in terms of, because you've kind of been all over the state, and you've had very unique experiences with your travels, and with where you grew up in Flagstaff, and where you work now. What is the value, particularly for Black and African American communities, who the stereotype, right, is that we don't go out into nature, we don't go hiking, or we don't climb mountains, or whatever those stereotypes are. But there really is, I think, an intrinsic connection for us and for all people to nature. So how do we get to a place of embracing that?
Yeah, because I'm not, I'm definitely not a big hiker. I'm not a huge water guy. But that being said, anytime I'm on a mountain, anytime I'm sitting in front of the ocean, it's literally, I think it would be impossible for somebody to not be moved by the sheer awesomeness, powerfulness, vastness, just unbelievableness, if that's a word, of nature, the power when you're sitting in front of the ocean. I mean, you feel very, very small when you like that. That's just the idea that, wow, just really kind of puts you in your place in the world when you're sitting up on top of Camelback Mountain, etc. So that being said, I think when you think about any vision of a great thinker, a great philosopher, a great yogi, a Buddha, usually you have a picture of them sitting in the woods somewhere, seeing them overlooking the sea, seeing them in a forest, seeing them in a canyon, and that because you're right, it's like that connection with nature it's I think it's definitely within all of us. It's something, and I don't know, again, I don't know if I can put it in words, but there's something that draws your soul to the earth, and maybe that's because we're all from the earth. Who knows? But I think it's a huge big thing when you look at like the Native American communities. So many of their rituals, or sheesh, our community, the African community in Africa, so many rituals are tied to fire, to earth, to water, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah. So with that, then I also think about the social determinants of health and just the environmental factors. So the fact that if you're looking at historical or modern Black communities, or just broadly communities of color in cities and towns, they tend to be the lower income places. They have challenges with sidewalks, lighting, particularly with parks. And so I think that's an important distinction to bring forward, is if we're talking about mental health and making changes to systems, that's got to be one of them, right? Is moving in that direction and bringing those spaces into those communities.
That's a great point. That's an excellent point, actually, because when you think about, again, remember, sometimes I'm limited by I'm limited by the fact I grew up here in Arizona. So now it makes me have that aha moment when you think about, when I think outside myself as someone who didn't grow up, someone grew up in the inner city. Yeah, there's no parks. I mean, it's a concrete jungle. You might go play basketball and in some project parking lot or something, but there's no Camelback Mountain. There's no, let me go down the street to go to this to have a cookout in the park and the kids can run around the grass and play on the equipment. No, absolutely. So that being said, that probably goes a long way in kind of why you know because when you think about Black folks, when you migrate out of the cities into the suburbs and stuff, yeah, you're not used to that. It's probably not something you're automatically going to jump into because that's not what you had growing up, as opposed to a lot of other people. So that makes a perfect sense. So yeah, I think by changing that narrative, making a push, like who knows, like some promos, some big huge, like big push, like, hey, hiking's cool. Hey, learn how to swim. Hey, let's go rafting in the Grand Canyon. Hey, let's go by the park and have a cookout. Hey, get out, walk more, be healthy more. Absolutely. I think just general healthfulness goes a long way with mental, kind of getting out into the open, out of this claustrophobic environment, this fearful claustrophobic environment. That in and of itself, I think, would go a long way in helping someone be mentally more healthy. If not alleviating a true disorder, it's going to go a long way, I think, with helping to put someone on the path to health, mental health included. I mean, we're talking about those. It's going to put someone on complete their whole body health, physically and mentally, by getting outside more, being more active, becoming, making that push to say it's actually cool to kind of go out and hike and do nature. You go to the park. There's nothing. I mean, that's a great thing.
Let's talk a little bit more about your own rituals or practices or ways that you exercise self-care. What do you do that you found helpful over time or in recent history to kind of take care of yourself, exercise some of that self-care or anything like that?
That's a good question. Me, what I do. I'm always, I guess, I stay active as far as healthcare. Like when I worked out my whole life, so physically, that's definitely a huge part of self-care. I read a lot, so I'm always reading. I think as far as self-care, I'm always reading. I mean, I have this conversation frequently the last couple of days. I read all the time. And I started off reading as a kid, so I'm always looking, learning, searching. I think that helps a lot with healthcare and with self-care, just by keeping your mind active, by just expanding your horizons, keep your mind active, just getting a broader perspective on life. But I think the more perspective you have with as far as with self-care, as far as mental health, if you don't have something that's preventing you from thinking properly, I think the more perspective you have, the more open your mind is, you're able to put things that are happening in front of you in your own experience into perspective. And by being able to put things in perspective, I think you oftentimes are going to suffer less from those things, or at the very least, you're going to realize that, hey, it could be worse, and I actually have it pretty damn good. So I think by reading, be more active, by, interacting with more people, going to the park, traveling more, those are going to help your overall mental health. I think those are great. What else do I do? I'm always, like, for instance, I always have like a hobby or a pastime. Like, for the last 8 years, it's been Spanish. So, I always have if you have goals, if you have something you're working toward, those are always going to help you with your mental health, because you're achieving things as you go along. These little, some of these, it sounds kind of silly, but these little tiny successes that you have over life, doesn't matter what it is. I don't know if you're building miniature battleships. I don't know if every time you're successful with anything, you were able to successfully do a bingo game or a tic-tac-toe. Those little successes build up over time. They help your mental health. They help your self-confidence. They help you just your outlook on life. They help you say, oh, I can accomplish this, I can accomplish that. They lead you to bigger and better things. So I think that helps a lot with mental. It sounds silly, but I think just accomplishing little things, no matter how trivial it might seem to anyone else, it's important to you. That's going to help you with mental health. And just realizing it's something you can't. One of the big things that I think that helps a lot of people with mental health, especially from the old school, like me, is, and no man's an island. You're not a lone wolf and everything. The human experience is all about sharing. The human experience is all about communication, all about interaction. So when you try to cut yourself off and just do it yourself and everything, I think you are going to suffer more than someone else who is willing to be helped and willing to commingle, willing to communicate, willing to be interactive with other people. So I think that's key as well. It's just like to realize that we're, no man's an island, and we're all here in it together. And the more you're willing to just, number one, service others, whatever you have, I'm going to provide that service to someone else. I think generally speaking, you're going to get that back 10 times. I think that helps a lot of times when you change your perspective and in your place in the world with your fellow human beings around you.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that you've talked about a little bit tonight and is part of your bio is the pride that you take in helping people to live healthier and more functionally and be more fulfilled with their lives. And you've brought up tonight a couple of those concepts of just wholeness and wellness together. So the whole health concept of combining your mental health, your physical health, all of those things. So what are some of the tips that you give to people if they're coming in and just looking for some recommendations of whether it's small changes that they can make or different things like that would help someone who's maybe listening tonight think of a small way to get started with practicing a more holistic view of their health?
Well, I think number one, with anything, I think it starts with getting yourself in to see your physician, your primary care doc, your internal medicine doc, to kind of check your overall health, because there's some things that you can do all the walking, talking, naturing you want to do, but if you have a thyroid disorder, if you have a hormone disorder, if you have diabetes, if you have heart, some of these things are going to make it, if not impossible, very difficult to overcome some things. So I think number one, you owe it to yourself, if you haven't seen a physician in a while, to go in and see a physician, to get a regular, just your annual physical exam, get your whole body checked out, heart and lungs, get your labs done to see if there's any kind of abnormalities that can be easily, fixed. So I think number one, when we talk about whether we're talking about mental health or we're talking about physical health, that's something that is imperative in my opinion. That's what I think. And thereafter, depending, is the openness to, if your primary care or your internal medicine doctor, your physician says, hey, this is what I think is going on, I think you might require psychological services. So the thing is, I was just talking to someone today about something like that. I think this way the doctor approaches it And that's how I approach it. Hey, man, it's like, I know this has stigma in the past, but hey, we're in 2024. Counseling's good. If you have depression, treatment's good. All these things are, it's just like, for instance, I think guys, very similar thing. Guys in the past used to be ashamed if they had erectile dysfunction. Nowadays, hey, man, who cares? That's what, if you, hey, man, you can't get it up, blah, blah. Nowadays, who cares, man? That's what Viagra's for. Again, there's no sitting there trying to tell the homies that whatever that I got this. Who cares? You got, if you have it, there's something to treat it. Boom, you're off to the races. So I kind of use that analogy. Same with anything else. Same with if you have depression. Hey, man, so what? You're depressed. Not so what you're depressed, but so what? You this is something you have. Guess what? You can treat it. That's a good thing. So you can mope about it if you want to, or you can say, yeah, this is what I got. This is what fixed it. I'm gonna fix it. And I'm gonna go on with my life. So that's what it's kind of the approach I use with people, as far as there's no more stigma, and if it is, it's kind of just you kind of being dumb nowadays. To me, it's just, you got it. Let's fix it. Who cares why or how, or you obviously care how and why if it's something that's you can prevent, or something that's going to help you treat it, family history stuff. But the point is, it's something that's there. Let's take care of it. So that's how I like to tell people: go see your physician, get your labs checked, be open to what the diagnosis is, and just have that they say of mine. I'm here to make my life, my very short life. I don't care if you live to be 100; it's still a short life in the grand scheme of things. I'm here to make my very short life the best it can be, the happiest it can be, the most productive it can be, the fullest it can be. And oftentimes, the only way we can do that is by accepting what is put in front of you. And if there's an option to treat it with, most of the time there is, just do it.
I love it. So last question, because I'm pretty sure I promised I was going to bring this up again after the last session. I believe one of the last things you said in the first session that you did with us was that you could tell people how to eat an entire pint of ice cream and still be healthy. Tonight is your opportunity to give us that tip. I think that is the perfect tip.
Entire pint. So again, so let's talk about that. So someone asked me today, hey man, you must. I go, no, I eat ice cream almost every day. I eat at McDonald's a lot of days. So I don't eat healthy per se. And I'm not recommending someone do this. Remember, when I talk about, there's difference between healthy and getting the job done. So my point is this: you can eat ice cream every single day and still lose weight. Losing weight is just simple math. If you have, every one of us has a number. You have a number. I have a number. You can go to the internet and have all kinds of calculations, pull up this number. Now it's not exact science. In order to get exact science, you have to go to some lab, be hooked up with all of this and all that. But it's a working number that we have with. So we're talking about your basal metabolic rate. A man is different than a woman. A 6 foot man, a man is different than a 4 foot man. And also your total daily energy expenditure. Professional athletes' total daily energy expenditure is different than an accountant who works down at Microsoft. Okay, so you have these numbers, you plug them in, and you're going to assume that the number comes out as essentially what you need to eat every single day to maintain the weight you want to be at. So again, it's almost like if you've seen those kind of little jokes or those little quizzes. What's heavier, a pound of feathers or a pound of bricks? And someone will say, oh, obviously the pound of bricks. They miss the point. Is no, there's a pound of feathers and a pound of bricks. So my point is, we're talking about calories. It doesn't matter if you need to eat 2,600 calories a day to maintain the weight. So you're assuming that by eating, so a pound of weight is 3,500 calories. So make it easy. 7 days a week, 500 calories times 7 is 3,500 calories. So if you want to lose a pound a week, then you eat 500 less calories a day. At the end of the week, you have a net deficit of 3,500 calories, which is a pound. You want to gain, you eat 500 more. So at the end of the week, you have a gain of 3,500 calories. You gain a pound. So my point is, it doesn't matter if you at that 500 less calories, if your goal to maintain your weight is 2,600 calories, and you eat 2,100 calories of lettuce, you're going to lose weight. If you eat 2,100 calories of nothing but ice cream, you're going to lose weight. This is basic math. This is thermodynamics. So that's my point. Now, is it the healthiest thing to do? Absolutely not. but that's not my point. The point is, again, I try to get this in people's minds so they realize This isn't like some complex formula. You just simply need to eat more. You need to eat less than what you store. It's that simple. Now, you can get into the macronutrients. You get in the healthy way to do it. Obviously, you're not going to be eating nothing but ice cream. But the point is there, kind of, so it gives people a kind of a different mindset, saying, "Oh, I don't need to sit there and eat, you know, rice cakes and and carrot sticks my whole life." No, you can actually eat what you want to eat, but you just can't eat all of what you want to eat. So that's, you need to count calories. You need to come in at this deficit consistently, not just one day. Consistently, you need to be at this deficit in order to affect this weight loss. So what I like to do is give people the idea that it's something that is possible. It's not something you need to kill yourself. Yes, it requires some discipline, definitely. I eat 2,300, 2,400 calories a day for that's why I eat. And a lot of times that might be 600 calories worth of McDonald's, but still less than my set point. Now I could definitely eat cleaner, and you should the older you get, but it kind of is just the point I like to have people, to make the people that this is something that's very possible. It's not something that's complex whatsoever. The only complex thing about it is your discipline. It does require discipline to have that number in mind to actually adhere to it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Evans, for being back with us again, for closing us out on that. The last thing I heard of that conversation was, I can eat all the ice cream I want as long as I
that's what people would like to take out of that.
Yes. But no, this was a great conversation, and I do think that there is value to ending on a little bit of a laugh, and just reminding ourselves that all of these things are things that we're doing to exercise that self-care and find ways to live those fulfilling lives, especially with some of the challenges that we're facing as communities. So
that's the goal. Yep.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming and joining us again. We hope that everyone who watched and listened with us tonight is walking away with something valuable, and we look forward to seeing everyone back next time.
I can't wait. Thank you so much, everyone. Ciao.